Chelsea, you've got internet searches going all of the time. Your inbox is a receiving ground for food industry news. And you've been sharing a lot with me lately around dynamic pricing and then something else called revenue growth management. And in that like sea of information regarding those topics, we've learned that Kroger has been the focus of some senators, initially Elizabeth Warren and Robert Casey, because they're concerned about some of the tactics that Kroger and also Walmart have implemented in their stores and what that might mean for consumer, privacy, price gouging, and a lot of other things. And I want to get into it today. I want to talk about it. I want to dive into it.
Yeah, I think we should definitely get into this. As you said, it has some pretty big implications. Let's start with, I think, again, because we talked about this, sort of tease this topic in a recent podcast episode. Yep. And I think that we should, for the people here on YouTube, really go back and define dynamic pricing and what that really means.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So dynamic pricing is essentially the practice of continuously adjusting price in response to internal and external changes, right? So that means if there's a shift in demand, if there's a change in cost, if there's a change in inventory levels, and more recently, if there's changes in customer behaviors or competitor right, moves and sort of changes, all of these factors would result in a price change. And this has been in existence for a while, right? With airlines, with sporting event tickets, with hotel rooms, and through like reading and researching some of the news that has been coming into the inbox recently, I also got a better understanding of the fact that Amazon has been doing this for quite some time, and they actually change millions of prices every few seconds on their website based on factors such as these and based on information that they have about the individual shopping on their website.
Okay, and so how is this translating like into grocery?
So in grocery, there's something called an electronic shelving label. So we're all used to going into a grocery store and seeing like a price tag on the shelf. It's usually a piece of paper. There's a price. Sometimes you can see the like price per unit. There's usually like a scannable, a SKU or barcode there. That is the traditional way that pricing has been communicated to consumers in a grocery store. And then also there is a barcode on every product, right? And that barcode or SKU is in the retailer's computer system so that when that product goes up to, the checkout, it can be scanned and the price, that's in the system is then charged to the customer. You can also store like promotional information and things within the computer system that's connected to that SKU. So if something is supposed to be 20% off, when it goes and gets scanned, that 20% discount, is given to the consumer at the time of checkout. It's also utilized to keep track of how many units are sold on promotion for a brand. So we talk a lot, to brand founders here, right? But consumers should also know this information too. When something's on sale in the grocery store, the store is not taking the hit for that discount. The brand does.
Yeah.
Right. And so the store tracks how many units are sold while a product is on promotion. And then what happens is called a chargeback. For every unit, let's say you sell 100 of them at 20% discount, the store has that information. They can report it to the brand or to the distributor. And then the brand actually pays the store back for that, 100 units that were sold at 20% off.
Okay. So they're essentially paying that 20% back to the store.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, got
and
it.
The transition to an electronic shelving label would eliminate that paper tag that we see on the shelf and replace it with an electronic tag. And what that means is that in addition to the SKU for the product, right, being in the computer system and having an effect on what that product costs at the checkout, you can actually very quickly change the price of the product on shelf, meaning currently, if something is $3.50, the SKU says it's $3.50, it has to be $3.50 when you go to the checkout. If it's not, the customer is going to say, hey, the price on the shelf was $3.50. So I don't know why this is scanning incorrectly. The price, is there. Someone will go back at the store, verify the price is $3.50, and then give the consumer the correct price. If we have an ESL, an electronic shelving label, the price of a product could be $3.50 in the morning, and it could be $4.50, let's say at 5 o'clock, when folks are getting out of work, they're picking up product to go home and make dinner, right? And so that instantaneous change can happen on the shelf and for the SKU during certain hours. And it just makes changing prices very easy, very streamlined, and can be made, essentially throughout the day if the retailer decided they wanted to do that.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to start with these ESLs, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of people listening might be aware of these or like have heard about them or news stories about them, but they typically have been called like digital price tags.
Yep.
Like very
Exactly.
simply, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
another way that people are referring to these ESLs. But I guess my first question here is, and I don't even know if it's a question as much of just a statement, but like this seems terrible for the consumer.
Right. I mean, it can be terrible for the consumer. I mean, we've seen the backlash to Wendy's doing surge pricing, right? What's really interesting is that, the approach I wanted to take to learning about this was not just what I was hearing in the news in regard to like Kroger and Walmart. And, there's some fear around AI and other things that these big retailers would be using in conjunction with the electronic price tag and in regard to dynamic pricing. But in reading articles written by Bain and written by McKinsey, right, these consultants for corporations, something that they take very seriously and that they point out as a concern is that you really have to know your customer, and you have to be aware of what they would be sort of willing to accept in terms of dynamic pricing and what they won't be. However, there was this really interesting statement in the Bain article that I read, which says, what customers may distrust in principle, they often accept in practice, especially with the right communications and an understandable rationale, such as capacity constraints or scarce inventory. So the industry knows that consumers are not going to like this. They know that
Yeah.
consumers' point of view on this is that it's not in consumers' favor, right? But what they're saying is that if you do it the right way, if you communicate it correctly, if you really truly know your consumer, you can do it. You can get away with it. And in practice, they're not going to fight against it. I think in that vein, why senators are so concerned. And when you read their letter to Kroger, stating some of their concerns, we're not talking about an Uber ride here. We're not talking about a baseball game or a, concert. We are talking about essentials for individuals and families. We are talking about food. And
Yeah.
when you get into a situation where essentials for living are being priced dynamically, right? And, what we've seen with Uber, for example, is that when there's inclement weather, when there's a natural disaster, when there is something terrible happening in a community, prices for car rides go up. And that's shitty. Let's be really honest,
Yeah.
right? To do that in a time of need. The same thing is expected to be happening on store shelves. Imagine if dynamic pricing existed during COVID.
That's like exactly where my mind goes,
Yeah.
and how I think about how chaotic things already were,
Yeah.
right? And then introducing something like this dynamic pricing,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it just would have spun out of control,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
But I think, what the stores are saying, what Kroger's saying, for example, is that this is a money saving time-saving technology for us as a company and for our team. And that's not wrong. I work with small retailers, independent retailers. And when we were recently examining software, POS systems for certain stores, the idea of electronic price tags, of digital price tags, was really enticing, and one that we would be willing to pay for because, as someone who's also worked in a small retailer, the process of pricing every product on shelf, making sure that every product has a price tag or a SKU that can be scanned at the POS, right? Making sure that the customer can see the price, making sure that the price is in the system, like that. There's a lot of layers to that of course can be very, organized and streamlined to a degree, but it takes a lot of manpower. And if you don't get it right,
Mm-hmm.
you end up losing money because you're not scanning the product correctly, or at all. And so there's efficiencies to be gained and revenue to be secured by making sure that you have a proper SKU system and pricing, in place. And so this is a good thing to me for small retailers. And I think what's interesting is that I see the benefit to businesses here. But where I think the concern is that larger corporations have the ability to manipulate, and to
Yeah.
utilize this data, information, and technology to extract more money from consumers rather than, using it to benefit consumers and keep prices low. We see this in conversations online about strategies such as revenue growth management, right? Revenue growth management is a strategy that helps companies to, alleviate inflationary pressures, right? To respond to consumer behaviors and needs, to remain competitive, right, in the market, et cetera, et cetera. And dynamic pricing is one of the things that they recommend, or that is recommended, in order to, survive and to thrive as a company in this ever-changing, market landscape. And it's really interesting to see how consultants, how technology companies, and how retailers are really talking about this. And again, like, I can see the benefit in it from an operational and logistical and pricing standpoint. We talk to our brands all of the time about needing to maximize profitability and margin. But there is this distinction that I see between doing it for the betterment of your business, your employees, and your customers, and utilizing it in any way you can to make more money. And as I said before, extract from your customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any new technology, any new resource out there, right, in the world, that can happen. You have the benefits of it, but
Mm-hmm.
that it can also be used for, I'll just say it, evil.
Yeah. And I think too, if you were to Google, and I recommend that you do, Google Kroger and dynamic pricing, the other thing you're going to start to see in the articles and around this topic is this fear of using facial recognition in stores to
Mm.
further price products based on an individual, and using that data, that facial recognition, to build consumer profiles that are more detailed than ever, right? I shared with you, Chelsea, previously, that we live in a house where the former, resident had a Kroger card. And we get their
Mhm.
Kroger coupons because they never change their address. My husband is an avid grocery shopper who loves the sale, who also has a Kroger card, and who also gets coupons delivered to the house. And so there's interesting things that we can learn from looking at both of the coupon packs. And that is that, the products that are discounted for him versus this other person are very different. It's evident that we eat very differently than this other person. This
Yeah.
other person loves snacks, right? Like, the free thing that my husband gets is like orange juice, and the free thing that this person gets is like spicy Frito-Lay chips and things like that. So
Uh-huh.
it's really kind of fun and interesting. The other thing that's really interesting is that they utilize these save 20% when you spend like $50 or more. And they're not the same across customers. So my husband's is usually like spend $50 or more and you get 20% off. And the other person's is like 20% off after you spend $80 or more. So this idea of building a customer profile is not new, right? It's attached to your loyalty card, but we've agreed to do it because there are benefits to us for allowing the store to collect data on us. It gets a little creepy when you hear or read the press release that came out in 2019 where Kroger and Microsoft were partnering to use cameras in some of their store setups to recognize shoppers. And they claimed that they were doing it to provide a good ad experience and a good promotional experience for the consumer. But the senators, don't believe this. They don't trust that that's the only reason that this was going to be used. And they were concerned about customer privacy and personal privacy surrounding the use of this technology in stores.
To relate this idea of customer data, customer profiles, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
this is really ubiquitous across industries now.
Mm-hmm.
Data is the most valuable thing out there.
Yep.
But to think about that in relation to, as you've already said, an essential item,
Yeah.
it just feels so icky.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think we have to think about this too, right? So if you look at the information and the fact that this AI would be used to not only profile customers, but then also to generate revenue in a new way inside grocery, I think is also really interesting, right? They're generating this new revenue because people are shopping in the stores and because those people have eyeballs that will be consuming advertisements that the CPG brands
Mm.
are paying for, right? And it's like, okay, well, great. They're generating revenue in new ways. So maybe they won't be price gouging us, on the shelf or with the products that they're selling, but they're also still able to recognize who I am, place an ad that they deem appropriate or beneficial to me on that screen. You know what I mean? And they're generating money through me in a way
Yeah.
still, right? It's so there's this sort of like, it's not a dichotomy per se, but as I said before, I see benefits, to small brands for the ability to collect data, right? When we know our customer better, we can serve them better. But again, it just doesn't feel like that's what Kroger would be doing with this information.
So Kroger started using these ESLs, the electronic, shelving labels, back in 2018. And currently they are using them in at least 500 locations,
Mm-hmm.
from what I understand. And this past June, Walmart announced that it would be rolling out the ESLs to over 2,300 stores
Mm-hmm.
over the next 2 years after they've also had a successful pilot program.
Yeah. So I think it remains to be seen how the dynamic pricing will be implemented or if it will be with the use of these ESLs. And so we're going to keep an eye on that and continue to report, whatever we hear and see. There are also some reports that the relationship between Kroger and Microsoft to put the facial recognition and customized ads in stores is no longer a thing and not moving forward. But we're going to also keep an eye on that and any new partnerships that Kroger may make with tech companies in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.